I was on my knees, half my body under a humming server rack in the Houston data center, a flashlight clenched between my teeth, and sweat dripping onto the concrete floor when he walked in. A brand new vice president, polished shoes, smug grin. He looked right at me and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Excuse me? Are you the janitor?" For a second, I froze. My hands were still gripping a live cable. My coffee cup sat just outside the rack, a paper lid already collapsing. And every pair of eyes in that room turned toward me, waiting to see if I would laugh it off, shrink into silence, or just swallow the insult. I didn't. I pulled myself out, slowly brushed the dust off my navy blazer, and met his stare. My voice came out steady, sharper than I expected. No, I mop up outages. The laughter that followed wasn't mine, it was his, and in that moment, it wasn't just a joke. It was a line drawn in the air one that said I didn't belong, that decades of work could be erased with a single sneer. I can still hear the echo of that laugh, and maybe that's why this story needs to be told. Before I explain what happened next, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? And deeper than that, have you ever been made to feel invisible at your own job? Like all your years of loyalty didn't matter at all? Share it in the comments below. You never know, your story might give someone else the strength to stand a little taller tomorrow. For more than 2 decades, I lived in the shadows of the systems I built. My name was rarely on the slides. My face never appeared in the press releases. But every night when the office lights dimmed and the hum of the servers became the only heartbeat left in the building, I was there, making sure nothing failed. That was my life for 22 years. Quiet, steady, invisible. I wasn't looking for recognition. Honestly, I used to believe that consistency spoke for itself. That if the system never went down, people would understand what that meant. But the truth is harsher. People only remember you when something breaks. And because mine never did, they forgot I existed. I'd pass by the glass conference rooms during big project launches, watching executives celebrate milestones built on top of the foundations I laid years earlier. No one pointed through the glass to invite me in. No one paused to acknowledge the person who had kept their shiny ideas from collapsing. I was the silent spine holding the whole body upright until the day the body started pretending the spine wasn't there at all. There were times it hurt more than I admitted, like when a junior manager once said, "You've been here forever, right? Must be nice to just keep the lights on." He meant it as small talk. But to me, it sounded like erasure, as if decades of problem-solving and sleepless nights could be reduced to a flick of a switch. Still, I stayed, because walking away felt like abandoning something I had poured my life into. I told myself that loyalty mattered, that one day it would be seen for what it was. But deep down, I think I knew better. Because when new leadership arrived, all that loyalty was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. When Colin Hartman arrived, the air in the office shifted. He was the kind of executive who didn't walk into a room, he floated in, wrapped in his own cloud of buzzwords and ambition. Every sentence he spoke was heavy with jargon, light as smoke, and yet people nodded like he was revealing some secret truth. That's why I called him the fog machine. He filled the space with so much noise that no one could see what was really happening. Almost overnight, he started rearranging everything. Whole departments were dissolved, people with decades of experience were reassigned, and meetings became theater shows where Colin was always the star. He had this way of pointing at a chart, talking about synergy and velocity, while quietly stripping away the foundations beneath it. To him, systems weren't lifelines that kept the company alive. They were just obstacles to his next promotion. I remember sitting in one of those crowded briefings, my notes in hand, ready to explain the risks of cutting corners. Colin interrupted before I could finish a sentence. "Technical debt," he declared, waving my work away as if it was nothing. "We'll clean it up later. For now, we move fast." Move fast. That was his mantra. He didn't care what cracked under the pressure as long as the reports made him look like a visionary. It wasn't just me. I saw younger engineers shrinking under his sarcasm, project leads second-guessing themselves after his casual jabs. He was building a kingdom on sand, and anyone who questioned him was treated like dead weight. And yet everyone played along, some out of fear, some out of blind hope that standing close to him might mean catching a little of his spotlight. I didn't say much in those meetings, but inside, I kept thinking, the fog always clears. And when it does, people finally see what's been hidden. What none of them realized was that I had already built something he couldn't spin away with words. Years before Colin ever set foot in the building, I had lived through the kind of nightmare that never leaves you. A midnight failure, a corrupted update, and a server farm teetering on the edge of collapse. I stayed awake for 48 hours straight, patching, rerouting, doing everything humanly possible to keep the company alive. That disaster left me with scars, but it also taught me one thing. If chaos comes again, there needs to be one clear path back. No shortcuts, no improvisation. So I built it, a single master token, a tiny piece of metal and plastic locked inside a Faraday sleeve stored deep in the vault 2 floors underground. With it, you could bring the entire infrastructure back online. Without it, nothing moved. But I didn't just hand it over. I wrote a protocol. 102 pages of steps, warnings, contingencies, each word meant to protect the company from ever spiraling into the abyss again. On the front page, I left a note in plain handwriting, break glass only if you've read the documentation. I remember the first time I explained it to a new hire. He turned the heavy binder in his hands and smirked. So basically, you just plug it in, right? I didn't answer. I just looked at him long enough for the smile to fade. People think safety is simple until they're the ones trying to pick up the pieces. Over the years, the token became invisible, like me. It sat untouched, waiting while managers shuffled priorities and Colin spun his fog. Most of them forgot it even existed. Some probably thought I exaggerated its importance. But I knew better. Because a safeguard isn't meant to be glamorous. It's meant to be silent until the day silence is the only thing that stands between order and ruin. And the funny thing is, when people ignore what you build, they also ignore the price of breaking it. I could already sense that price creeping closer. The memo came in on a Tuesday morning, just 3 sentences long, dressed up with phrases like strategic restructuring and realignment of resources. I had seen these words before. They always meant the same thing. Someone was about to be erased. This time, it was me. My role as head of infrastructure was dissolved overnight. Colin stood in front of the team that afternoon, clicking through a glossy deck about efficiency gains and empowering the next generation. When my name appeared on the slide, it wasn't followed by thank you or even transition. It was followed by reassigned to mentorship duties. I was told I'd be guiding an intern, a kid barely out of college with more confidence than caution. The same one who once joked that the master token was just a fancy USB stick. Now he was expected to shadow me, as if 22 years of vigilance could be passed along like a coffee order. I remember sitting across from him on that first day. He leaned back in his chair, earbuds still dangling around his neck, and said, "So what exactly do you do all day? Just keep the lights on?" I smiled faintly, but inside something broke. That night, I went home, opened my laptop, and started what I called my personal audit log. Every undocumented patch, every compliance waiver, every corner they cut and expected me to cover, I recorded it all, line by line, timestamped, with proof. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was clarity. If they were going to erase me, I wanted a record of what really kept this company standing. By the end of that week, I had 3 folders on my desk. One labeled receipts, another violations, and the last one written in thick black ink, "You had your chance." I didn't know exactly when I'd need it, but I knew the day was coming, and when it arrived, I'd be ready. The day I left didn't feel like a grand ending. It felt more like an afterthought. HR sent me the standard checklist: return badge, laptop, phone. Clear out my desk by Friday. No speeches, no handshakes, no acknowledgement that I had given more than half my life to that place. So I walked in quietly that morning, carrying a cardboard box. People pretended not to notice. A few whispered in the hallway, but no one stopped me. In corporate culture, departures are like funerals. No one wants to attend. I filled the box with the little things no one else would care about: a coffee mug with a chipped handle, a framed picture of me and my team from 10 years ago, most of them long gone, a notebook with handwriting only I could decipher. And then, before I closed it, I made one last trip downstairs: the vault. I swiped my badge for the final time, walked past the rows of blinking lights, and opened the locked drawer where the token had been sitting untouched for years. I slid it back into its Faraday sleeve, pressed the flap shut, and placed it carefully between my mug and my photo frame. To anyone watching, it looked like just another piece of junk, but I knew better. As I carried the box through the lobby, the CTO brushed past me, eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even recognize me. That's how invisible I had become. To him, I was just another employee, leaving with a box of memories. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that inside that plain brown box sat the heartbeat of the entire company. They thought I was leaving empty-handed, but I wasn't. And sooner or later, they were going to find out what that really meant. In my final week, I did something most people wouldn't bother with. I wrote everything down. Every hidden switch, every backup path, every line of instruction that could save them when things went wrong. I poured years of knowledge into a single knowledge base. I didn't cut corners. I stayed late at night formatting the documents, adding diagrams, even inserting plain language explanations so no one could claim it was too technical. By the time I was done, it was the cleanest, most thorough set of instructions the company had ever seen. And do you know what happened? Nothing. No one read it. No one even clicked the link. When I asked if they had questions, one manager smiled politely and said, "We'll get to it later." Later, of course, never comes. Meanwhile, the intern they had paired me with was already making mistakes. He deleted a folder he thought was old clutter, not realizing it was tied to the override scripts. I caught it just in time to patch the damage, but I didn't say a word. Because I knew if they wouldn't respect the knowledge when it was handed to them, they wouldn't respect a warning either. That night, I scheduled one last message, an email to compliance, complete with timestamps, documentation, and receipts. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even bitter. It was simply the truth, locked into an automated delivery at 5:05 p.m. on the day I walked out. Before I closed my laptop, I created a final folder on my desk. The cover was marked in bold black letters, "Let them burn." It wasn't anger. It was inevitability. Because in every system, ignored knowledge has a cost. And sooner or later, that cost comes due. I didn't know exactly when the bill would arrive, but I could already hear the clock ticking. My last day arrived with no ceremony, no farewell cake, no kind words, not even a passing glance from leadership. I walked through the halls one final time, carrying my box as if I were invisible. And maybe I was. But inside me, the clock had already started. At 4:57, I sat at my desk for the very last time. The office buzzed with Friday chatter, people laughing, booking rides for happy hour, completely unaware that a different kind of timer was running in the background. On my screen, the scheduled email sat waiting in my outbox. Delivery, 5:05 p.m. I glanced at my watch, 4:59. My heart should have been racing, but it wasn't. After all these years, I felt oddly calm. It was the kind of calm you only feel when you know you've already done your part, and the rest isn't yours to carry anymore. I took one last sip of lukewarm coffee, shut the lid of my laptop, and placed it gently on the pile for IT to collect. Around me, chairs scraped against the floor, people packing up their things, oblivious. 5:02. I slipped out the side door and stepped into the Texas heat. The sunlight was blinding, almost theatrical, like a curtain call. I could hear my own footsteps echoing across the pavement as I walked to my car, the box tucked under my arm. 5:04. I turned the key in the ignition, but I didn't drive off just yet. I sat there watching the seconds tick forward on the dashboard clock. Then came 5:05. Somewhere deep in the servers I had protected for decades, the message left my outbox. Cold, precise, undeniable. A truth they could no longer ignore. And as the office behind me carried on, unaware of what was about to unfold, I smiled for the first time in months, because the countdown wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. At first, it was just a small ticket, a failed credential rotation flagged on the system dashboard. Someone shrugged, marked it low priority, and moved on. But systems don't forgive negligence. They remember. Days later, the warnings multiplied. Login failures processes hanging mid-cycle, backups stalling without explanation. Engineers scrambled, thinking it was just another patch gone wrong. But when they tried to force a reset, the screen lit up with 2 words in bold: token required. Panic spread like wildfire. Colin barked orders in the war room, demanding instant fixes. The intern fumbled through scripts he barely understood, his hands shaking as he typed. Managers whispered about outages spreading across regions. Clients were calling furious that demos were crashing mid-presentation. And compliance was already knocking, demanding to know why critical safeguards were being ignored. The truth was simple. The failsafe I designed had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It locked everything down until the right steps were followed. But those steps were buried in the documentation no one ever read. I wasn't there to see the chaos, but I could imagine it. The fluorescent lights, buzzing phones ringing nonstop, screens filling with error strings they didn't recognize. I could hear Colin's voice echoing across the room. Who signed off on this? Silence followed because the answer was in black and white. He had. And while they tore their hair out searching for shortcuts, the token sat quietly where I had left it, untouched in its sleeve, waiting. By the time they realized what was happening, the damage had already begun to ripple far beyond their control, and what came next would take the chaos to a whole new level. The conference room they called the war room was never meant for war. It was glass walls, polished tables, and an oversized screen meant to impress investors. But that day, it felt like a bunker under siege. Dozens of people crammed around laptops, voices overlapping, alarms pinging from every corner. Screens flashed the same red banner, failsafe, active, token required. No matter what commands they tried, the system spat back the same response, cold and unyielding. Colin stood at the center, red-faced, tie loosened, barking orders like a general who'd already lost the battle. "Roll back restore from backup," he shouted. But the backups were corrupted. The scripts half deleted by the intern weeks earlier refused to run. Someone from compliance slid a binder across the table. My binder. 102 pages, untouched, dust still clinging to the spine. "It's all here," she said flatly. She documented everything, step by step. No one met her eyes. The intern whispered almost to himself, "She warned us." His voice was so soft it was nearly drowned out by the noise, but it landed like a stone in the room. For a moment, everyone went silent. Then the shouting started again. Engineers argued over who had authority. Managers drafted apology emails to furious clients. Legal demanded timestamps, receipts, anything to prove this wasn't negligence. But every path circled back to the same dead end, the token. And the token was gone. Colin slammed his fist on the table. "Where is it? Who has it?" No one answered, because the truth was worse than losing it. They had never bothered to ask who the custodian really was. They assumed it didn't matter. They assumed I didn't matter. Outside the glass walls, employees walked by pretending not to look in. They could hear the chaos, the desperation, the unraveling of leadership. The fog Colin once used to blind everyone was finally lifting, and what it revealed was terrifying. But the collapse wasn't finished yet. The real reckoning was still on its way. The boardroom was quiet in a way that made people nervous. No chatter, no small talk, just the sound of papers sliding across the long oak table. For years, Colin had commanded the spotlight with his buzzwords and charm. But today, the fog was gone. What remained was raw accountability. The compliance officer spoke first. Calm, measured, almost surgical. She laid out the timeline, the missed warnings, the deleted scripts, the binder of instructions left unopened. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. Then she said the words that made the room shift. There was no sabotage, only neglect. Colin tried to push back, of course. He waved his hands, raised his voice, blamed legacy systems and poor knowledge transfer. But the board wasn't buying it. They had the receipts. My receipts. Every log, every signature, every timestamp I had left behind. An investor leaned forward, his voice sharp. You had the documentation, you had the protocol, you chose not to use it. Colin's face drained of color. For the first time since he arrived, he had nothing left to say. I wasn't there in person, but I was present in another way. They had forwarded my exit protocol, and it sat projected on the big screen in front of them. My handwriting, my note, break glass only if you've read the documentation. Someone asked if I could be contacted. A short silence followed, then the legal counsel answered flatly, she already responded. And my response, just 4 words. Refer to my exit protocol. It wasn't spite, it was clarity. I had given them the map. They had chosen not to follow it. By the end of that meeting, Colin was no longer VP. His resignation was announced internally as effective immediately. But the real damage wasn't just his career. It was the trust that evaporated, the illusion of control that shattered in front of the board. Still, the story wasn't finished, because while they scrambled to rebuild, I was already one step ahead, charting a different kind of future, and that future came with a price. After Collins stepped down, the company scrambled to regain control. Engineers were flown in from outside consultants, paid at premium rates, and endless nights were spent trying to rebuild what had already been broken. But the truth is, no system and no trust can be rebuilt overnight. As for me, I had already turned the page. I didn't return to the building, not even when they asked. Instead, I started my own work as an independent consultant. The same executives who once ignored me now had to negotiate for my time. When the call came from the CTO asking, "What's your rate?" I answered simply, "Double." It wasn't revenge, it was recognition. For the first time in years, my expertise was valued at the level it always should have been. And outside of those sterile office walls, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Looking back, I realized it was never really about the token or even the chaos that followed. It was about what happens when loyalty is taken for granted, when the invisible people holding everything together are treated like they don't matter. Because sooner or later, the cracks show, and when they do, everyone pays the price. The lesson is simple, but it's easy to forget. Never underestimate quiet work. The people who keep things running, the ones who don't ask for credit, who show up day after day, they are the foundation. Ignore them, and the whole structure eventually collapses. I share this story not out of bitterness, but because I know I'm not the only one who's been made to feel invisible at work. And maybe if you've ever felt the same, hearing this will remind you of your own worth. So let me ask you, if you were in my position, what would you have done?